Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ron.
We are here mostly to talk about the agenda laid out in A Better Way on education, which itself draws heavily on a white paper that you wrote a few years ago. But I want to start, you may have heard there's a presidential debate coming up on Monday. You've heard something about that.
You know, there's a rumor out there.
There's a rumor.
This may be an election year.
And I'm just wondering, we've heard a little bit from Donald Trump on K-12 education, gave a speech in Cleveland the other day. We've heard very little on higher education. How much of a sense do you have of what agenda, if any, he would bring to the presidency on higher education?
That's a great question, and that I really don't know the answer. Many of us are getting to know Mr. Trump sort of day by day. We have heard some things from Secretary Clinton. Apparently, she has an idea for free education, free being $350 billion or so. But I don't know. I don't know what his specific ideas would be.
You know, as you mentioned, we do have more specifics, in fact, a pretty long policy paper from Secretary Clinton on higher education, the centerpiece of which is this idea of free public school tuition, public college and university tuition for families up to $125,000 a year. What do you think of that idea?
Well, look, we have a problem. It's been already discussed here, or mentioned here this morning. We widely recognize that you're better off if you have a post-secondary education. If you have a college degree, there are estimates out there that you'll make $1 million or so more in your lifetime. And we know that there is high student debt, but look at what's happening. We have, I was going to say kids, but that's wrong. More students now are non-traditional students, what we've come to call contemporary students. They're older, second jobs, and looking for a way to improve their lives. And so they go to school and they get out and the jobs aren't there. So the first thing, in my judgment, that we need to do is start looking at policies that will allow people to get back to work. If you go to school and you get your grants and you take out loans and you study and you probably don't finish in 4 years, maybe you finish in 5, or maybe you don't finish, but you finish and then you go try to get a job and you end up going back and living with mom and dad. So the first thing here is to do what we can to get pro-growth policies in place so that there are opportunities for the graduates. And if you look at a proposal like Secretary Clinton's, it's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, which apparently she says is paid for by raising taxes. From my perspective, that's the wrong way to go if you're trying to encourage growth and get people opportunity for jobs.
Is the problem the raising taxes, or is there, do you see an inherent problem in basically saying that we are going to make public college or university tuition free for families up to $125,000?
Well, there is a problem there. In fact, you wrote a nice piece about that very thing, is that it'll have a unintended consequence, a perverse effect of how students are going to move. So you have students, which you put very well, who have the ability to go to, say, a private college, and then they find out that it's free to go to the public college, and so they shift to go to free. As I remember thinking when I was going to college, cheap is good, free is better.
And you learned that before college. That was good.
I know, but I didn't learn it until I was actually applying and trying to get into college, and I had the opportunity to go to free instead of cheap. I went for free. And so I'm actually the example of that. And so you push, you start to take slots, and it will actually put pressure. I thought that was a pretty good hypothesis.
If this is a bridge too far, certainly we have seen a shift over the last 15, 20 years in the cost of public college away from taxpayers through public state subsidies toward students and families. Does that concern you at all? Is there any appropriate response to that if this is the wrong response?
Well, look, we would all like to see more access and, frankly, more success for people going to school. And so we need to look at ways that will help institutions lower cost and make it cheaper to go to school. So one of the principles that I think we all should be behind is promoting innovation. And there are some great ideas out there. There are online courses that were not even a dream a few years ago. There's competency-based education. You need to look for ways to allow students, whether they're kids coming right out of high school or people going back for another opportunity, to get into school. And maybe they're not, they don't need to go and get a 4-year degree. Maybe they just need a skill in order to get a job. So they need to have information so that they can make choices. It's another principle which we are supporting, not complicated morass of things, but simple information. What is it going to cost? How long is it going to take me to get through here? What am I going to have when I finish? And then we need to promote this idea of innovation. I was talking to my very, very excellent staff. I think they may be in the room, so they're outstanding staff. And we were laughing about the fact in 2005, we can laugh now, we tried to define, distance education about video cassettes and CD-ROMs. So one of the fundamental principles as we go forward is keep government out of the way of innovation. We don't know. We hadn't envisioned MOOCs. We need to make sure that institutions are able to innovate and provide ways for students to go to school, get the education they need, and do it cheaper.
I'm going to get to that agenda in a moment, but one last question in this area. I mean, you talked about maybe it isn't always a 4-year experience. Maybe it's gaining skills after the K to 12. Is the idea the Clinton plan builds on the president's proposal of tuition-free community college? Mm-hmm. Is that any more acceptable, more targeted? Would that be could that work better than the bigger, broader, more expensive promise?
Well, that proposal alone, the number I looked at, that's about a $60 billion thing. And again, I don't think that's the right approach to put the taxpayers on the hook and the economy on the hook, I would add, for this kind of an idea. You need to look at other ways, and I think there are a number I've mentioned, a number of others out there, and some we haven't thought of.
Yeah. Let's talk about near term and long term. The near term, you've passed 5 bills already in the House this year, including simplifying FAFSA. What is the status of, and is there any life on those in the Senate? What is your understanding of, are any of those likely to reach the president's desk?
That's just not fair to ask me about the Senate.
Yeah.
Come on. I would hope so. These passed overwhelmingly. They were very bipartisan. There is nobody in America who's ever looked at FAFSA and said, well, this is pretty cool. I think I'll knock this out over breakfast. No, that's not how it works. It ought to be the complicated, instead of free. Federal student.
It's another admissions test, maybe.
It's awful. So it's widely recognized. The administration's already moved to what is known in the sort of colloquially as prior, so you can use the previous year's income numbers. We wanted to put that in statute. Very, very bipartisan, very popular. Clearly, we need to clean that up. We need to simplify the whole student aid system. Right now, there are 5 different federal student loans and 9 different repayment options. So we started to get at those very simple bills to help minority-serving institutions and things. Ought to be simple for the Senate to pick up. Turns out they're having some trouble. We continue to talk. I think Senator Alexander is a great partner for me, my counterpart in the Senate. In fact, we just had breakfast this week talking about what we might be able to get through.
And did they give you any indication that any of these will surface?
I can't say that they did. They didn't say that they wouldn't, but I think we started this conversation by recognizing this is an election year. And the election is rapidly approaching. It is highly likely that the House and Senate will close for the election here in the next few days or weeks, and so we're running out of time. I would like to get those done. I would still like to get the Perkins Career and Technical Education, which passed overwhelmingly in the House, done. And the Senate's got to work through its politics and its processes.
Let's look a little more long-term at the principles that were laid out, at the priorities in the Better Way plan, which are based largely on the white paper that you put out in 2014. 4 large principles: empower students and families to make informed decisions. What's the best way to do that?
Well, they need to have the information available from institutions that's not pages and pages and folders and folders. You need to know, they need to be able to go very quickly and look and see, what does this cost me? What's the expectation for finishing? On average, how long do kids get through? Simple information so they can look and see, make an informed choice. I mean, it's very, very frustrating to us. Let me do just a small side step here. We've been looking at this, my colleagues and the very excellent staff I mentioned earlier, and saying, how can we do this? How can we provide this information? And then you do that work and you start to scale it down and get some sort of dashboard that would be very accessible. And then you ask some young person, well, why did you choose, college so-and-so? Well, I visited the campus and it just felt good. Or my dad went there, or my mother went there. Or, well, they're the national champions. And so all of the stuff that you're trying to put out to them about the cost and the value of the degree that they're going to get and so forth, and it's, I visited the campus and it felt good. Well, you got to kind of work through that. I can't do a lot about that except give them the information that...
The administration obviously went through a long process looking at a rating system, trying to...
Yes, they did.
Why did you feel that's the wrong way to go?
Well, they don't need to be in the rating business. And what is that going to do, pitting one school against another? What are the criteria that they're going to use? I think that's a mistake. They recognize it's a mistake and they pulled away from that. They too are trying to promote dashboards, information that would be available for prospective students, but that's clearly a mistake.
Second principle in the Better Way document, simplify and improve student aid, and you talk about one grant, one loan, one work study. Is the advantage there just simplicity, or is there an operational improvement as well from unifying that way?
Well, simplicity certainly up front, but I think when you do that, the very fact that it's simpler, you probably do get some operational return on it. As I mentioned before, when you've got 5 student federal loans and 9 repayment options, people don't know how to make decisions. So just simplifying that would help students make decisions. It would be much more cost-effective, much simpler to be administered if you only have one for the department to be involved in, and now they're so confusing. And because you have a trouble with this one, the solution that's been happening too often is not to simplify, but you add another choice. We need another repayment option because we missed this gap here. We need to move it in the other direction.
I'm sure for many people in this room who read the Better Way section on higher education, the sentence that stopped them over their coffee was, the Pell Grant is also on a fiscally unsustainable path after having been recklessly expanded by previous Congresses. What does that translate into?
Exactly what it says. I don't just make these things up. That's exactly what's happened. By increasing the maximum amount and putting in the mandatory piece, the amount of money that we're spending on Pell Grant has soared, I want to say 4 or 5 times since I've been in this business. That's unsustainable.
So what's the solution?
You simply can't afford it. Well, you need again to simplify, and you need to put it on a path. You've got to decide what you're going to do about both the mandatory and the discretionary piece, and do you need the 2 pieces? It's kind of inside baseball, but nevertheless, it's important to how these things work out, and put it on a path so that it's not continuing to escalate and go out. We would like to make sure that the people who really need Pell Grants get Pell Grants, so you have to look at eligibility, you have to look at what the maximum amount is, and these are not easy. I didn't suggest that this is going to be an easy thing to do, but if you agree that Pell Grants are important, and I do, and I think there's bipartisan agreement there, you have to make sure that it's viable.
One more question in the student aid area. Is expanding income-based repayment of loans perhaps something that both parties can come together around? We hear a lot of talk about that on both sides.
Yes, I think that's true, but again, you don't want to put another one in. There are several income-based repayment paths that you can take right now, as I mentioned earlier. That also needs to be simplified so people understand what money they've got. The other thing that we were doing in informing students was doing some giving them some financial information so that they understand the difference between a grant and a loan. They're going to college, you'd like to think but still, we've got some people who don't understand that. And so they need a better understanding of where they are, how much they owe, and how they're going to pay it back. But income-based repayment has got some pretty good bipartisan support.
Third principle in the Better Way, promote innovation, access, and completion to reduce college costs. You write, federal impediments that prevent institutions from delivering higher education in more creative, cost-effective ways must be eliminated. What are the most important impediments that you see?
Well, you've got rules that are in place. I was confessing to our notion that we knew what distance education would be, and it was video cassettes and CD-ROM, so you've got that piece in there. But by insisting on old metrics of seat time, for example, you are taking away the possibility of competency-based progress. And so the premise here is that there are innovative ways, all of which I don't know, and it would be a mistake, CD-ROMs and video cassettes, to try to put that in. You want to open up the possibility for institutions to find new ways of providing financial support, cooperative agreements that could exist out there, new ways of providing education. Again, you can have, I think Clemson has got a program where they are working with automotive company to provide exactly the kinds of skills and education that people would need. You need to allow those sorts of arrangements to go forward and not tie things to, sort of seat time credit hour.
Marco Rubio, who was the presidential candidate I believe you supported, talked about deregulating the accreditation process to try to make it easier for non-traditional providers to receive accreditation. What did you think of that idea?
Well, you need some, you need an accrediting system, and it certainly should be looked at, and we have been looking at it. I'm not ready to embrace Marco's plan here, but I do embrace the notion that we need to look at the crediting system. And one of the things that the creditors have had to look at and agree on is that for a long time, they go through this very laborious, very time-consuming process, and they go to the library and say, well, how many books do you have? Well, I don't, the book is in your pocket. Everybody just brings it up. So they're behind as well, and they need to look at, do you have the capacity to deliver what you say you can deliver? So that warrants attention, and I would commend that to the next Congress. I'm sure we won't have time to do it in the remaining days here, but it should be looked at.
Fourth and final area of focus in the Better Way, ensure strong accountability and a limited federal role. What are some of the specific federal regulations you'd like to see rolled back?
So I'll never forget sitting in a hearing, and we had some school administrators, higher education, and one of them came and sat down, and I'll leave the name of the school. It's a matter of public record, but I'll probably misremember it, St. John's or something like that. And he came down and he had sitting on the table next to him a stack of binders about that big. And so my question was, well, are those the federal regulations? He said, no, those are the table of contents for the federal regulations. That it cost, I think Vanderbilt or somebody has a study out that these regulations cost about $11 billion. Well, that adds to the cost of going to school. So I'm not going to pull a regulation out when you've got those table of contents. That warrants going at it. Now, Senator Alexander, working with his colleagues in the Senate, got at that issue, and we thought we could get a regulatory simplification piece done. I hope that they'll be able to do that in the next Congress, because it certainly warrants being done.
One specific, the gainful employment rule for for-profit institutions drew a lot of resistance from congressional Republicans, but it has survived its court test. Is that fight over, or does that go on into the next administration?
I think that goes on, but in part because you need to look at what's happened with this administration. The for-profit sector has its champions and its opponents, but you have millions of students who get credentials, degrees and certificates and credentials in that sector. About a third of all nurses entering the field, for example, come from the for-profit sector. And yet it has been under a relentless pressure. The gainful employment, the 90-10 rule, a lot of pressure coming from the administration. Where you have a bad actor, then certainly that needs to be addressed, and there are laws and rules in place to address that.
You think the existing rules are sufficient without the gainful employment?
Now, the gainful employment has been sitting there in language, statutory language, for a very long time. And then this administration decided they needed to define it. And again, the metrics that you use to define that are in my judgment, somewhat suspect. So I've been one of those people trying to push back against that. It's been bipartisan. My colleague, Alcee Hastings, Democrat from Florida, has been a big ally of mine as we tried to address this, because as you put pressure and force out of business some in the for-profit sector, you are disproportionately affecting minority students in a lot of cases. And Alcee Hastings recognizes that, and so we need to put a stop.
I've got a couple of overview questions I want to ask you at the end, but let's bring in the audience for a few minutes for some questions. We've got one, Lindsay, one up here. Hold on, microphone coming.
Uh-oh. If you don't have the microphone, you can't ask the questions.
All right. Okay, thank you. Linda Katech from UC Davis. We all have agreed that access to higher education is a right, it's a human right, especially in today's economy. And we all understand that the student debt issue is in the trillions. Would it be possible that a $60 billion program with appropriate oversight for student loans could really save us a lot of money?
I don't think so. You're talking about, I assume, the president's proposal for community colleges, free community colleges. I don't think so. There are always unintended consequences. We talked about one of those, I think, in relation to Secretary Clinton's proposal. But you don't want to devalue the education. You want to look at ways to make it simple and straightforward for people to get to school. You already have a system where poor students eligible for Pell Grants can largely pay for a lot of that anyway. And so if you put a middle class, upper middle class entitlement in there, I think that you're not really helping the poor students who need it the most. I think it is important that if you want to help poorer students have their opportunity, that you focus your resources and your efforts there and not put this blanket effort out there.
Let's see, have another question?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Luis Maldonado. I'm with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. Thank you for your leadership and support of HSIs. On the point about simplifying FAFSA, I believe that the Gates Foundation has illustrated that there's about 2 million otherwise eligible students who won't even complete the FAFSA. Has the committee looked at what it would cost to implement it? Because obviously it would provide even more access to higher education. So I'm just curious, because we're very supportive of it, but we're not sure about the cost.
Nor am I. I don't have a Congressional Budget Office score on that. Or if we do, I don't know what it is off the top of my head. But I am concerned about cost, to the earlier question. It does matter. But when you write policy, when you make law, chasing what I call the Congressional Budget Office zero, that is no cost, you can make some really bad policy. Because the CBO, the directors will tell you that on their best day, they're going to be plus or minus 20%. And yet we treat it like it's in stone, and we write policy chasing that zero. In this case, it simply makes no sense. It simply makes no sense to not simplify. Too many simples in here. That application system. It's nuts. I mean, there are a lot of you in here with advanced degrees that probably don't want to take that on.
You're nearing the end of your time in Congress.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know if you're counting it. You know, we're counting the days to the election. I don't know if you're counting the days to the inauguration. So I want to ask you two broader questions, kind of reflect on your period. First, I'm interested in your thought about the complexity and political difficulty of making K-12 policy versus making higher education policy. How does that compare?
Well, I think we did a pretty good job in getting rid of No Child Left Behind and replace it with the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that was a long time coming. I was the senior Republican, the ranking member. George Miller was the chairman of the committee when we really started to try to get at this thing. And then we had an election and we switched roles. We've known that this has been overdue for some time. So I'm going to answer your question. I really am. It's not a filibuster. So, but one of the things that happened in K-12 is that the mistakes in No Child Left Behind became particularly apparent and particularly onerous as school after school was failing to make progress. And the administration decided to issue temporary conditional waivers, driving policy directly from the executive branch, from the department. And so the outcry from the ground up got loud enough that we could, in a bipartisan, bicameral way, say, we're going to change this. We have to. We tried this, largest intrusion of the federal government in K-12 education in history from No Child Left Behind, a recognition that it wasn't working, Democrats and Republicans screaming that we had to do something. That pressure enabled us to, whenever we came to, sort of an impasse, a Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, to power through it and get it done. The student debt, the access question is getting pretty loud in higher education, and you kind of need that. You need this voices coming. We need your voices coming to say, hey, we need to get this done. And then the FAFSA, every voice in America who's ever tried to apply is saying, you got to do something about this.
So as a closing thought, let me ask you an even broader question. In this job, as you've waded into education policy over the years, has it changed your views either on the role of public education in our society and or what it takes for the education system to succeed in our society?
Well, I think I know a whole lot more about it. I would hope so. I've spent years now on this committee and as the senior Republican and chairman years and looking at the problems. I mentioned the outcry about No Child Left Behind. Public schools have to succeed. And in some cases, they are simply not succeeding. And so I think it's fair to say that I've been open to looking for ways to change that. And so we've seen the very rapid growth of public charter schools, for example. That's providing a choice, and some of them are doing poor jobs, but many of them are doing almost miraculous jobs. So again, I think that innovation and allowing these good ideas to succeed is essential to making the changes we need for education to succeed. And because we're built around this public education system, it has to succeed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us.
Ron, thank you.
Thank you. Join me in thanking the chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.